Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Rukas again, and we are now in Module 6. In this module, we're going to be taking a look at issues of social justice and the role that that plays in criminology. Now, I've hinted at a lot of this stuff as we've gone along the way about issues of social justice issues concern issues largely of race, class, gender, and in the current age as well, sexual orientation. So, first of all, I want to address what's probably one of the most important things, one of the most important challenges that we get is why do we teach this? Are we trying as an institution to brainwash you? Absolutely not. All right. You will if you're if you are in the program, you will take a course that looks specifically at social justice issues. And this week's readings are incredibly controversial, but it will give you a hint of the thinking that goes behind social justice thinking if it's something you're not familiar with already. But we actually when I started here about 5 years ago, we as a department had a very long discussion as to how we could better prepare our students to deal with a situation as criminologists, as people that are likely to be involved with the criminal justice system, of how to deal with the threat of becoming the center, a pivot point of some sort of riot or social unrest based on an action that someone may have done. And we found that the most effective, or we as a department came to the conclusion, is that many times those in law enforcement are not familiar with the frame of thinking that those in communities have that give rise to protests and to disengagement with police and law enforcement because they may not agree with it. All right. Now, whether you agree or disagree with the point of view that we look at from social justice, which is that racism and class play a major role with how criminal justice is dispensed in this country, and that lack of economic opportunity from the Chicago school that we talked about last week, that lack of economic opportunity is many times the cause of criminal activity, and that interacting with issues of race and class, all right, create an issue that is basically kindling that just needs one wrongly perceived act to set it off into a firestorm. And what we decided to do was to basically teach that point of view. All right. Now, we do not endorse the specific point of view, but we need to inform our students of the point of view that's out there. And that if they're dealing with criminal justice issues, that they're going to run into this point of view. And whether they agree or disagree with it, they have to understand the thinking behind it. All right? Now, what you're seeing this week is a Pew report that looks at incarceration and the disparate impact that it has on people of color, and particularly young people of color. We're going to be looking as well at a report on Ferguson, Missouri, which I actually have people read because I've done some research there myself and actually ran smack dab into this point of view that I've been teaching for years. And last but not least, I'm going to give you a very controversial video that showed up a couple years ago that a woman recorded while her boyfriend was shot, and how that can create how that creates unrest, and how possibly that officer may have acted differently had he been more in tune to how the line of thinking went. But the bottom line of this is the fact of the matter is no one wants to be the center of a riot. And again, the readings are going to go much more into this than I am here, but realize that the focus of social justice is on disadvantage, and that disadvantage causes crime. And that the disadvantage that causes crime creates a system whereby that people enter the criminal justice system, and because they don't have the resources to get out of it, so that they become engulfed in the criminal justice system. And the criminal justice system takes on a character all its own, where a simple traffic ticket can 5 or 6 years down the road lead to a situation where somebody gets incarcerated and has property forfeited. I'm going to share a story that I actually had doing research in a jail in Florida where I ran into this. And to be honest, it's the first time I actually started giving some thought to this. But gentleman I had started working, the gentleman at that point in time was 22 years old. He had gotten into trouble when he was 16 doing something stupid. He was going 85 on a country road with a 40-mile-an-hour speed limit. Got a ticket for going 45 miles over the limit. Fact of the matter is he was never able to pay that ticket. However, he lived in a very rural part of the country, a very rural part of the state of Florida, and there were no jobs in the community in which he lived. The closest community that had jobs was well, with the exception of a couple of gas stations, and they weren't hiring, was Gainesville, Florida, that was approximately 15 miles away without any sort of public transit to get there. So initially, he kind of would, to be honest, he told me he was a bit of a bum, but he just let the ticket lie. But apparently, when he was 18, he fell in love with a girl, and she got pregnant. At which point, he felt like he was responsible for his family. At that point, his fine had ballooned because he hadn't paid it. So he had like a $500 ticket that had now doubled to $1,000, and then there were lack of payment fees. But the fact of the matter is he needed to support the child. So he drove anyway. And eventually, what's going to happen to anyone one day when they don't have a driver's license is he got caught. Ended up at that point getting another driving while license, get a driving while license suspended and revoked. Took the ticket again. He couldn't afford to pay the ticket. Anyway, by the time I caught him, he was 5 driving while license suspended and revoked down the line, at which point his fine had ballooned to something like $15,000 that there was no way in the world that he was going to be able to pay. And at that point, after the 3rd ticket, he apparently had to spend a month in jail, and the situation had gotten more complicated. After that month in jail, he had gone home with his girlfriend, and that ended up with a 2nd child that they had to feed. So anyway, by this time, he had been with me. He had served a 6-month sentence when I was interviewing him. He was getting out, and I still remember talking to him as part of the study, and he said, "You know what? I'm never going to be able to survive. I've got to support my family, and I can't drive because I'm going to get caught again, and they're going to send me to prison. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use some land in back of my grandfather's house, and I'm going to plant some pot. And you know what? Then people will come to me, and I don't need to worry about driving." That's kind of the thinking that how this system works and how the system creates a system whereby people become more, it creates increasing opportunity for criminality, at which point criminality becomes a more rational action. Now, certain facts that people can argue for reasons, but a few things that cannot be argued, which is both sides agree on. One, first of all, it's very hard at this point to distinguish the impact between race and class. The fact of the matter is many African Americans are poor. So the question is it because of the fact that people are African American or the fact that they're poor? One of the things we see universally is individuals that are trapped in jails and prisons or are somehow engulfed by the criminal justice system are people that lack resources. Now, this country does have an issue of African Americans being more likely to be poor than individuals of other races, and we don't know how that works out. However, there is no denying that people with fewer resources and people of color are more likely to interact with the criminal justice system than other individuals. Issues that we're currently looking at as part of the social justice people are concentrating on. First of which is something known as disparate policing. And what that means is police resources tend to be dedicated to neighborhoods that have high crime. Neighborhoods with high crime tend to be neighborhoods that are largely black and largely people of lower income. Or I should say, there are low-income neighborhoods. However, because of the correlation between race and class, there's a disproportionate amount of African Americans. What disparate policing means is that I'm more likely to get caught doing an activity if there's more police around. If there's no police around and I run a stop sign, no big deal. But if I'm in a neighborhood that has more police patrols, I'm more likely to get into the system for that offense. And if somebody, for example, is carrying pot in their car, they're more likely to get caught with that pot in a situation where there's more police around. That also brings up the war on drugs. The fact that there's disparate policing means that drug offenses are more likely to occur in neighborhoods that are poor and have a bigger police presence. Again, as we've talked about earlier, by and large, what we see is that people among all class lines use drugs about the same, illegal drugs, with rich people using them a little bit more. So with that, why is it that most of the people that are the victim of war on drugs enforcement tend to be individuals in low-income neighborhoods? Third, something we talked about in the previous slide, which are issues of fines and fees, is that the people that are most likely to get fines and fees are the people that can't pay them. And if somebody gets a fine or a fee that they can't pay, how do we stop that? As you're going to see in both the CNN piece and the video, how do we stop that from them ending up in the criminal justice system? Or are we incarcerating people simply because they're poor? With that is the whole notion that the criminal justice system perpetuates poverty, because once people are inside of it, it's very hard to get out. And more importantly, it's very hard to find living wage employment. Last but not least is the fact that people that are in the system feel that they've lost their voice because many states deny voting rights for felons. Again, this is stuff that we will take a look at much more in courses to come. Other issues that make up social justice, and I'm going to go over these briefly, but I want to bring them to the forefront, are issues of gender. First of all, there is a bias in the criminal justice system overall, and that men make up 85% of those that are incarcerated or in the system, and they make up approximately 49% of the individuals that are alive. As such, there is a bias and men are more likely to be arrested. That said, gender issues arise because women are more likely to be arrested for certain crimes. Specifically here, prostitution is the one that's brought up. And the fact is that when we look at prostitution, it really does take two to make a prostitution act, to make an act of prostitution occur. Why is it that the girl is arrested and many times the man that's paying for his part of the prostitution transaction is let go? Another major issue that is gender-based that we take a look at is the fact that women have a very hard time proving sexual assault and domestic abuse, although the Me Too movement of the past few years has kind of helped with that and bring it more to light. However, the fact that if a woman charges somebody of sexual assault and domestic abuse, and the fact that many times her life goes on trial instead of the accused, is something that frequently comes up in these types of discussions. Again, it's also the foundation behind what we see happening over the last year as part of the Me Too movement. Last but not least, we want to look at LGBTQ issues. By and large, the LGBTQ community is viewed as a social justice success story. They have gone from a group that in the 1960s was classified as sex offenders to a group that today is celebrated. As an LGBT professor myself, it's something I'm very proud of. However, many of the laws that were put in place were criminal justice issues. Many of the rules used to enforce LGBT behavior were laws that were part of the criminal justice system and had to be overcome. However, while we have seen a great deal of success with the LGBT community, we also have to point out that many issues remain today with the trans population that are still up in the air and need to be settled. With that, once again, thank you very much for this week. We're almost done with the course. Next week, you're not going to have any readings. Yay, 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 yay. Just hit Module 7 next week. I'm going to briefly go over the assignment. Once again, thank you very much. Have a good one.